In August of 2005, Air France Flight 358 was landing at Toronto Pearson Airport in exceptionally bad stormy weather. The runway was nearing its end, and the aircraft couldn't stop. Soon, pilots realized that they couldn't do anything. The Airbus A340 overshot the runway and crashed just outside the airport perimeter. After the plane stopped, a fire immediately broke out. This is the story of Air France Flight 358 and how a highly trained cabin crew saved 309 lives. It was another summer day on the 2nd of August 2005. 309 passengers, including many businessmen, vacationers, and students, boarded Air France Airbus A340-300 bound for Toronto. Shortly after, before 2 in the afternoon, the aircraft left Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport heading west. The almost 8-hour flight was uneventful. Besides passengers, there were 12 crew members on board the Airbus. The cockpit crew consisted of 57-year-old Captain Alain Rosé, who had 15,411 total flight hours, and 43-year-old First Officer Frédéric Naud, who had 4,834 hours of flight time. The aircraft being used was the Airbus A340 Quadjet, which was common with many airlines' fleets at the time and was delivered to Air France in 1999. Its last maintenance check was carried out in France on the 5th of July 2005. Airbus A340, even though it was considered a good plane, was starting to lose the competition with the Boeing 777-200 and 777-300ER, which recently entered the market. Shortly before 4 in the afternoon, Flight 358 was cleared to descend into Pearson Airport in Toronto. The weather at the airport was described by many as awful, with ground stop being declared 2 hours before. When Airbus A340 approached Toronto, severe winds, heavy rain, and localized thunderstorms were present near the airport. The plane had been cleared to land at 16:01 on runway 24L, which is the shortest runway at Pearson Airport, at 2,700 meters, or 8,900 feet in length. During the flare, the aircraft entered a heavy shower area, and the crew's forward visibility was significantly reduced as they entered the downpour. According to the passengers, it was almost completely dark at the time of landing. The Airbus touched down 1,220 meters, or 4,000 feet from the start of the runway, with a speed of 148 knots, 8 more than normal. It was already impossible to stop it, as the Air France A340's Quick Reference Handbook stated that in wet conditions, with a 5-knot tailwind, reversers operative, and 6.3 millimeters of downpour on the runway, the braking distance increases to 2,016 meters, or over 600 feet, and the only about 1,500 meters was remaining at the moment of touchdown. As expected, after touchdown, the aircraft did not stop before the end of the runway, but continued on for another 300 meters, or 980 feet, until it slid into the Etobicoke Creek Ravine at a speed of 148 kilometers per hour, or 80 knots near Highway 401. Immediately after the aircraft had stopped, the fire broke out and the cabin crew began evacuation. To make matters worse, 4 emergency slides out of 8 were inoperative. 2 of them remained closed due to fire, and the other had been damaged by the debris before. Several passengers were forced to jump from the aircraft to escape. The actions of the flight attendants, who ensured that all of the passengers were able to exit the plane quickly, contributed to the safe evacuation of everyone on board. The first officer was the last person to leave the plane, which was evacuated within the required 90-second time frame. The emergency response teams arrived on site only within 52 seconds of the accident occurring. During the evacuation, several passengers received assistance from people driving at the time who had been passing the airport. Some of the injured passengers, including the co-pilot, were taken directly to hospitals by motorists, while others were taken to the airport terminal. The main fire continued to burn for 2 more hours, while others continued until the early afternoon of the following day. The accident led to the cancellation or diversion of hundreds of flights to the nearby airports. Most of the injuries occurred to passengers and crew located in the flight deck and forward cabin. In total, 12 people, including the captain, sustained major injuries and were brought to the hospitals. Shortly after the fires had been extinguished, the investigation started. and watch closely as some interesting and shocking things were revealed later. Firstly, 12 seconds elapsed between the moment the plane touched down and when the pilots applied the thrust reversers. This significantly increased the speed at which the plane overran the runway. According to witnesses, one of the aircraft doors opened on its own during the landing. However, black boxes were unable to reveal this. The direct cause of the crash was the change of the surface wind direction from a headwind component to a 10-knot tailwind component, which increased the aircraft's ground speed and effectively changed the flight path. The aircraft then crossed the runway threshold about 40 feet above the normal threshold crossing height. However, the pilots became committed to the landing and believed their go-around option no longer existed. This could be caused by the fact that the aircraft had fuel only for around 20 minutes of flight at the time. The final report stated that the pilots had made many mistakes. Most importantly, the crew didn't calculate the landing distance required for runway 24L, even though there were thunderstorms reported at the time. Consequently, they were not aware of the margin of error available for the landing runway, nor that it was eliminated once the tailwind was experienced. The pilot not flying didn't also make the standard callouts concerning the spoilers and thrust reversers during the landing roll. This contributed to the delay in the pilot flying selecting the thrust reversers. But the most interesting thing regarding this crash was about to happen. In June 2008, so almost 3 years after the accident, Air France filed a lawsuit against the Greater Toronto Airports Authority, NAV Canada, and the Government of Canada for $180 million. In the statement of claim filed with the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, Air France alleged that the airport authority failed to provide a safe environment for the conduct of civil air operations. Air France says Transport Canada was negligent by not implementing the recommendations of a coroner's inquest into the 1978 crash that urged the creation of a 300-meter safety area to give aircraft more room to stop after landing and extension of the runway. However, while an inquiry by the TSB found runway safety zones at the end of runways at some Canadian airports to be below accepted international standards, it also highlighted that Toronto Pearson's runways meet current Canadian standards and suggested that precautions should be taken by airlines when landing in bad weather. So yes, the airline sued the airport operator for having too short a runway. In December 2009, a $12 million settlement was reached between Air France and the class representing 184 of the 297 passengers. Ultimately, Air France stated that it would not lose any money from the lawsuits as it is covered by its insurers. In conclusion, this crash occurred, as always, due to many factors. The most important ones were stormy weather at the airport and mistakes made by the cockpit crew. Shortly after the crash, Jean Lapierre, the Canadian Minister of Transport, referred to Flight 358 as a miracle because everyone on board survived, despite the aircraft's complete destruction. The investigation found that highly trained flight attendants' actions prevented casualties during the crash. The accident thus highlighted the vital role played by highly trained flight attendants during an emergency. Thanks for watching. Please support and subscribe to my channel.